This is an introduction to the land use built environment part of our Palolo Valley. So this particular theme is looking at land use and the built environment in Palolo. This sort of ties into the residential neighborhoods part, which is another theme, but we're looking at specifically what we want to emphasize is actual land use. So in this particular theme, what we're actually looking at is how people have used the land, and some of the emphasis we really want to have is agricultural. Now this would include the wet field system that existed in the central part of the valley that we know of historically. This would also include the dryland areas, which is a lot less information on. Truck farming in Palolo was a big thing. There are still farmers in the back of the valley doing truck farming as we speak here in 2020. But there's very little discussion of farming in the historic period in this part of the island, in the Kona section, and this includes Manoa, Nuuanu, etc. I guess my suspicion would be is it was just so much a part of what people were used to, they didn't think to actually write it up or look at it. Having said that, I have a sneaking suspicion there's probably material, especially at UH, maybe in the School of their Agriculture, Tropical Ag School or something, that talks about this, because they would have been involved in, helping farmers be successful, especially here in Oahu, given the fact that they're tied into that. Lion Arboretum might have some information. Again, we don't know. We haven't had the time to take a look at it yet. So this has a whole set of different sort of related tasks, but the main theme is dealing more with farming in terms of land use, and the particular built environment related to farming, which would include irrigation systems, maybe road access, walls or foundations, so whatever is tied to basically being a farmer in Palolo over the last maybe, if we could, 300 or 400 years. First off, what we need to do is we actually need to come up with a detailed discussion of the history of farming here. Like I said, we still have farmers here in the valley right now. And I suspect at some point we want to really, bring them into this, involve them into this conversation and get their personal histories, but also get their sense of how that process has happened, because I can guarantee farmers have been back in that same spot for at least 400 or 500 years. And many of the farmers there now, I suspect, can actually give you a fair amount of that history of at least the area right around them over a pretty long period of time, and none of which is in print, I might point out, as far as I know. So that would be one. It would be actually the history of what farmers were doing here, what they were growing, and where they were growing it, and how has that changed over time. Now, but most obviously would be that the wet field, the low east systems in the center part of the valley disappear really early. Do we actually, for example, is there information about those? Do people talk about those when they were still in use? Or are there discussions, for example, in the Hawaiian language newspapers about the loss of those fields, which people were very frequently writing about and talking about in Hawaiian language newspapers in the 19th century was the loss of lands, the loss of productive lands. And then, what is actually being grown in the valley now? What all is being, produced? I have no idea if there's people actually doing farming in the more sort of residential part of the valley. And I'm not sure, it could be that the Farm Bureau, which we have here in Hawaii, would actually be able to give you that information directly. So that's one task. A second theme or second task within the theme is the whole history of truck farming in urban Honolulu. This is going to be more expansive because this would basically include truck farming in Honolulu, not Palolo specific. I have not seen any, you see pictures, but I haven't seen any sort of discussion of how farming starts with the idea that truck farming can be defined as the farming that you do in or around an urban area, and then you bring the food into the urban center. So when Honolulu is becoming a city in the 19th, 20th century, you had a large part of the population doesn't have access to farmland anymore. So what you get is on the fringes, and this would include almost all the fringe areas, Punchbowl, for example, Manoa, Nuuanu, Palolo, all these areas, people are making money growing crops because it's close enough to town. You can put them in the back of a carriage or the back of a truck. You can drive into town, drop them off the same day, and the people, it's what we call local produce or local farming now. This originally was called truck farming. That means exactly what it says. You put it in the back of the truck and you go to town. Over the last, say from the 1850s, well, it'd have to be 1870s, that's when the town starts to grow. From the 1870s on, how has truck farming developed here in Honolulu? What was grown, what was sold, who were the bigger players, in other words, who are the guys doing a fair amount of this, and how has it changed over time, and what's left now? This becomes not only a historical study, but at some point it also becomes a huge discussion, because one of the enormous situations right now, or the huge discussion points, is the idea of self-sustainability in an urban area, and not studying how that sustainability has happened over the last 200 years is sort of really dumb if you want to talk about something you want to do it now and you don't even know what you've been doing in the past. So on one hand, this is a very Palolo thing, it's a very Honolulu thing, but it's also a very relevant theme going into our future here. The third is actually looking at the technical aspects of farming in Kona areas. Kona areas being defined as where you don't have a lot of rainfall, in contrast to, say, Kaneohe. So what are the limitations of being a farmer in this side of the island? What crops are the most successful in Kona areas, have been and are now? Now remember this, we're not talking just about Hawaiian plants here. We're talking about anything that you grow that you sell. This could be cut flowers, this could be, you know, macadamia nuts, you know, whatever it was. I know coffee, for example, was a huge thing on this side of the island in the 19th century till the blight hits in 1897 or whatever it is. So how has this changed over time? And what of these crops, and this again would probably be trying the tropical ag guys or someone else over at UH, or the Farm Bureau, or the guys at the state safe forestry at DLNR, would be what crops are actually best for the land. If you're going to grow stuff, what's good in terms of nurturing or sustaining the viability of the soils, for example, and what's really bad. Cotton, for example, is an absolute disaster. Cotton kills and sterilizes the soil. So you know, what of the plants here are actually good and what are bad? I can pretty much guarantee coffee is really bad for soil. So, you know, over time, how has that changed and how does that work? Are there discussions that occur here in the other Kona spots about water access, water control? Things of, for example, related to pollution. You're in an urban area. How does that affect your farming? The fertilizing that you have to do. What's the harvesting processing that you do if you're doing commercial truck farming versus, say, you know, big scale farming in a rural area? How is that done in the past and how is it going on now? So I would like to keep this in Honolulu. We could, you know, Lahaina is an obvious area that I'm more familiar with that has some of the same discussions, but their situation's very different. So I think, and also we want to stay away from the Ewa Wahiawa region because that has an entirely different dynamic and it's also not really in the same type of Kona situation. So we want to stay within the lease side of the coalhouse, if you want to think of it that way. So this would involve actually not only doing a fair amount of actual research in terms of looking at resources. Newspapers maybe, I'm thinking more that would actually be publications by various agencies or, for example, research studies at UH about this stuff over the last, you know, X amount of years. I know UH still has a research group that actually plants crops. I think now they're out in Wahiawa somewhere. But in the past, they must have been around here. Lion Arboretum might have some real insight into terms of how this stuff works. There's a fair amount of, I suspect, resources out there that no one's ever actually asked these type of questions to. So it's very much as in the other themes. These particular tasks, especially this last one, are very much more, you know, a classic example of detective research. You know it's out there, you know it's probably available, but where is it? How do you find it? And how does one source give you, for example, oh, you know, I'm not sure about this, but go talk to so-and-so. So I think this would be, you know, it's a very valuable, it's something that's not only valuable for our project. I think a lot of this is actually very valuable for larger discussions in Honolulu in the 21st century and sustainability. But I don't know anyone doing anything like this. So since they're not, we're going to do it. So if you're involved in this theme, these are the tasks here. And you know, there's going to be more than enough to keep people occupied in a lot of this.